Guia de estilo e instruções para a síntese de fala. Você é um narrador, palestrante, com voz potente, forte e autoritária. O tom deve ser firme e inabalável. Contexto de continuidade. A frase anterior era Water and makes a small widening ring. Bianca, você está no meio de uma frase ou pensamento. Mantenha o ritmo e a força vocal sem quebrar a conexão. Haja como se estivesse transmitindo uma verdade fundamental. She had been with him for 2 years after his wife died. In the first year of grief, he had let her in as one lets in a hand to guide them across a busy street, practical, necessary. Over time, the hand had lingered. He had not noticed the way it curved the other person's path. He moved through the house with the care of one searching for an old photograph, pulling at corners of the present to see what lay beneath. He found doors closed that used not to be. Beneath the doorknobs, he found the faint dust of absence, a ring of neglect around spaces that were no longer lived in. He found on the hall table a small envelope with a white card folded inside. For things that trouble you, leave them, Bianca had written in an elegant hand that seemed to smooth edges away. The card made his mouth go dry. Flashbacks arrived like shutters flapping open in a storm. He remembered the hospital room years ago, the fevered light, the sterile smell, the sound of machines remembering how to sleep and wake. He remembered hands that had once held his and let go. He remembered cradling a child who had been rushed away in a quiet horror he had never learned to speak about. Those losses had been carved into him like initials on wood. He had folded them inward and covered them with work and dinners and appointments, and in the in-between rooms someone else had been invited to rearrange the furniture. Nina followed him down the corridor and, at the third step, stopped. She pointed, almost without moving her lips. "The lamp," she said. "It's been off." It was a small thing, and yet not. The lamp at the landing was always on at dusk and at dawn. Its soft bulb was a punctuation in the house's sentences. A lamp off meant fewer eyes on the rooms. A lamp off meant less chance of notice. It was the first metaphor of a much larger sentence. Adriano flicked the wall switch, and the lamp hummed to life, its light softening the corridor's edges. The house seemed to exhale, and then, a little, recoil. He glanced at Nina with a new steadiness. "Have you told Bianca anything about Donna Elvira's routine?" he asked. Nina looked away, her hands folded around the towel. "I tried, sir. I told her the doctor said regular afternoon light and small walks in the garden. She said the garden hurt the roses and that the neighbor might see. I suggested the sitting room by the window. She said it would be drafty." Adriano swallowed. His throat made a noise he had not expected. There are names for certain kinds of silence: omission, dumping, eraser. He had always considered them abstract. They had not been located until this moment, in this hall, under this lamp. He found the bedroom door ajar. The room smelled faintly of lavender, the scent someone chose because it meant calm. On the dressing table, pictures had been replaced. Family photographs had been turned to the wall or taken down entirely. A small painted portrait of Donna Elvira as a young woman had been slid into the bottom of a drawer. Instead of the old frames, there were sleek magazines, polished items that reflect light but did not reflect history. Adriano's foot nudged something on the floor. It was a small blanket, folded once with a faint pattern of paint-splattered flowers. He had watched Donna Elvira sew those kinds of patches for stray cats when he was a boy. A toothpick of memory pricked him. She had taught him how to hold a brush, how to wait for color to dry. He picked up the blanket and smelled it. It smelled faintly of paint and coconut oil and old paper. It was not something that belonged in storage. It was something that belonged in use. Nina watched him, her jaw working. She had been the one to see first the small gestures that became rules. She had watched Bianca change the kitchen's routines. The tray of Donna Elvira's midday snack moved from the central table to the back corridor, then to the outside door where it could be left and retrieved. She had watched picture frames slide. She had watched the easel be covered at night, the bristles of open tubes of paint capped and swept away. She had watched a chair that was always warmed by a shawl be left empty. She had also watched slow things fracture under convenience. The house had been Adriano's mother's map of habits. With each new line Bianca drew, a road closed. Nina knew what those closures did to a person. She had seen it in the stoop of the old woman's shoulders, in the way Donna Elvira made a small, private attempt to go to the window, and then changed her mind, as if the sky were not for her any more. "I kept putting her tea at the door," Nina said now, almost involuntarily. "Sometimes I would see her through the crack of the door, sir. She would look at the cup and then sit down on the threshold. She would not say anything. Sometimes she would fold the cup back into the tray. Sometimes—" Nina's voice failed. She smoothed the tablecloth with fingers that had allowed her to be an instrument of quiet service for years. Adriano pressed the blanket to his chest like a thing that might translate to meaning if held long enough. He had been absent in more ways than one. Work had been the constant excuse, a device to keep his hands occupied. He had not noticed small rearrangements, the odd change to the way a house breathed. Grief had taught him to shelter his feelings, and in that shelter he had let others build their furniture without asking how it fit. He went to the garden, the wooden gate protesting with a familiar creak. Outside, the jacaranda tree leaned over the wall like an old friend. Its trunk was carved with the years of seasons. Adriano could remember etching a small initial into it when he was a child, proof that he had once tended what belonged to him. The tree stood, patient and unassuming. Nina was faster than the word shame. She had always been that way, a woman who moved from intuition to action with the quiet decisiveness that years in service teach you. Her hand closed on the wardrobe's knob before Bianca's fingers could encircle the small creature. "What are you doing?" she said. Her voice was small but sharp enough to carve air. Bianca's lips thinned. She moved with an illusion of casualness that made Adriano feel colder than he had for months. "It's a little pet," she said. "You know how I love unusual things. It's nothing." Nina did not let go of the knob. "You're hiding an animal in the wardrobe," she said. "In the laundry, where it cannot see the sun, where it will be alone." Her gaze flicked then to Adriano, as if searching for the anchor of authority. "And who told you?" Bianca smiled, the kind of smile that arranged teeth into trustworthiness. "I have means, Nina. I asked for discretion. You know how strict regulations are now. I did what I could." It was a small battle of air and manners. Bianca's voice was silk-coated intent. Nina's was plain iron. Adriano felt the old architecture of their house rearrange itself into an argument. One woman dressed things in urgency and genuine care. The other dressed things in a posture of propriety and advantage. The monkey, meanwhile, made a soft, plaintive noise. It reached a hand out and touched Nina's wrist like a child seeking proof that the world was real. The touch was damp and warm and immediate, and it made Nina's face fold into tenderness for a moment that dissolved the lines of fear. Adriano stepped between them before anything could tilt further. "Bianca," he said. His voice was a dropped pebble. "Why is there a monkey in my house?" Bianca's eyes flicked to him, and for the first time there was something like calculation behind her calm. "It's mine, Adriano," she said plainly. "A friend of a friend could not look after it. I offered care." He wanted to ask how many other things she had offered to care for. He wanted to ask about the sealed photos, the folded paintings, the lamp left off. He wanted to ask, most of all, how long she had been rewriting the margins of his mother's life. Nina found her voice again. "It needs sunlight, water, company. It's a living being. You can't keep it in a wardrobe." Bianca's hand moved toward the small creature in a gesture that was meant to be maternal, but landed with the chill of possession. "It's quiet in there," she said. "It's safe. Why bother the house with more noise?" Adriano felt the answer in his chest like an unsteady drum. The word safe in Bianca's voice had been used to close doors. It had been used to rewrite the idea of what the house needed. It had been used to justify moving people into corners where they were less troublesome to the shape of an upwardly polished life. The monkey, meanwhile, made a soft, plaintive noise. It reached a hand out and touched Nina's wrist like a child seeking proof that the world was real. The touch was damp and warm and immediate, and it made Nina's face fold into tenderness for a moment that dissolved the lines of fear. Adriano stepped between them before anything could tilt further. "Bianca," he said. His voice was a dropped pebble. "Why is there a monkey in my house?" Bianca's eyes flicked to him, and for the first time there was something like calculation behind her calm. "It's mine, Adriano," she said plainly. "A friend of a friend could not look after it. I offered care." He wanted to ask how many other things she had offered to care for. He wanted to ask about the sealed photos, the folded paintings, the lamp left off. He wanted to ask, most of all, how long she had been rewriting the margins of his mother's life. Nina found her voice again. "It needs sunlight, water, company. It's a living being. You can't keep it in a wardrobe." Bianca's hand moved toward the small creature in a gesture that was meant to be maternal, but landed with the chill of possession. "It's quiet in there," she said. "It's safe. Why bother the house with more noise?" Adriano felt the answer in his chest like an unsteady drum. The word safe in Bianca's voice had been used to close doors. It had been used to rewrite the idea of what the house needed. It had been used to justify moving people into corners where they were less troublesome to the shape of an upwardly polished life. He looked at the monkey. It looked at him as if it could measure the depth of his absences, and found them wanting. Its fingers curled once around a loose thread on the shawl. Adriano's hands were suddenly very empty. "Why is she being kept from the sitting room?" he asked. He could hear the edge in his voice, but could not find the way to strike it down. The question was about more than furniture. It was about what it meant when a house stops noticing one of its people. Bianca smiled, thinned. She prefers solitude, she said. Age brings certain preferences. I'm only respecting that. Nina's eyes narrowed, as if looking through the answer to the silence behind it. Respect doesn't mean hiding. It doesn't mean taking her painting and putting it in a drawer. It doesn't mean keeping dinners at the back door. She spoke plainly, and there was a moral clarity in it that did not seek complicity. Bianca's voice sharpened, and Adriano knew the reason. When someone's presence overextends influence, their defenses become slippages in control. People who hold power in private sometimes tighten that power in public. "You're being dramatic," Bianca said lightly. "It's just a set of domestic changes. You and I have different lifestyles. I'm trying to make the house more proper for events." Adriano thought of invitations hanging like banners in his mind. Brunches, charity lunches, people from contexts that valued polished corners more than worn hands. He had let the house become a background for other performances. He had allowed a woman who smiled well to speak for what his home should be. He had allowed his grief to be filled with other things. Nina did not hold back the rest. You move her things, you change her light, you take her into a room out of you, she said. You tell the others that she asked for it, but she doesn't ask. She sits and waits for someone to notice. For a moment, Bianca's etiquette slipped, and her face flushed with something complicated. "You meddle when you should mind your work," she said. Nina's hand tightened on the wardrobe. "I mind people, not work," she answered. "Dona Elvira raised your husband. She raised him. She should not be an ornament in a room for your guests." The monkey's small hand found Nina's wrist again. It made a soft, almost human noise, like the husking of a cough that is mostly understanding. The animal did not care for the politics of a house. It cared for light and for touch and for simple routines. Watching it, the two women's argument narrowed to the line of who could claim more right to decide what was life and what was display. Adriano noticed, finally, a thread he had been missing. The wardrobe where the monkey had been kept was not a wardrobe at all in the way he had thought. It had been used as storage for odd things, linens, boxes labeled in Bianca's neat hand. He pulled open the drawer at the bottom and found a folded shawl with a scent he knew, lavender and lemon and paint. Outside, beyond the laundry room window, the jacaranda tree shivered as if the wind had whispered a secret. One petal, purple as memory, came loose and floated down, drifting like a small benediction toward the garden. The sight steadied him in a way that felt like the first small agreement between what had been and what could be. He looked at Nina, at Dona Elvira, at the monkey enfolded in the old woman's palm, and he understood the shape of the work ahead. A reclamation not only of rooms, but of time. The house would have to learn to be inhabited again. In the doorway, Bianca's hand tightened around the frame, as if she were unsure whether to step forward into the light or retreat into the neatness of her arrangements. For a moment, she seemed to consider the cost of being seen. Nina's voice, low and steady, cut the hush. "We should not put him back in the wardrobe," she said simply. Adriano nodded, though he had not yet decided what to do with the monkey. The decision felt like a small first step toward something larger, toward noticing, toward presence. If this story matters to you, stay with it until the end. If you care about the dignity of those who raised us, please subscribe and like. Share what you see, and if this brings up something in your life, consider reaching out to someone you trust. They stood like that for a moment, in the clean, strange light of discovery, each of them collecting a new truth. The house had been rearranged into silence and spectacle. Now, those who loved it had to decide whether to reclaim it room by room. Mina took a breath, then asked the question no one had expected her to ask, and yet that everyone wanted answered. Where else has she been put away? Her voice was soft. It was the voice of someone who knew the answer would be found not in one place, but in many small corners. Adriano straightened. He felt the old pattern of avoidance break like thin glass. "We will find out," he said, "all of it." He did not yet know how the work would look. He did not know what Bianca would say, or how she would defend herself. He did not know what the neighbors would think, or whether the house would forgive him quickly for his absence. He only knew that the lamp at the landing was on, and that was a start. They moved together into the narrow maze of the servants' wing, the house rearranging itself under their deliberate footsteps. In the laundry room, the monkey blinked in his small private light and curled again in Dona Elvira's hand. The shawl fell away and offered the half-painted canvas to Adriano's eyes. A streak of blue, a small wave, a color that had not yet been finished. He traced the paint with his thumb, and it came away slightly on his skin. The color stained him like a confession, small, indelible, a proof that some things you cannot simply sweep away, because grief and care made them integral. They walked through the house, room by room, and found the soft geometry of omission. A chair moved, a photograph missing, a door left closed with the casual politeness of someone arranging a museum. Each piece was a small thing that together formed a much larger architecture of absence. Adriano felt the story begin to shift under his feet. What had been hidden in plain sight would now come to light. The small creature in the wardrobe had been the first to be found. The rest would follow, because once you notice the world hiding people, you cannot unsee it. Outside, the jacaranda dropped another petal. It landed on the stone path, and there, for a moment, looked like a small flag. The house answered with a soft creak, as if agreeing to be present again. They paused at the foot of the stairs. Adriano looked up toward the upper rooms where secrets had been kept because it was easier to keep them there than to answer for them. He thought of his mother at the easel and of all the small daily things she had once taught him that he had not practiced. He imagined suddenly an easel set near the window and paint drying in the sun. Dona Elvira squeezed his hand. "If you stay," she said in a voice that folded hope into the words, "I will finish the painting." He smiled, and the painting's color seemed to spread. He had thought the work to be only about removal or accusation, but it would also be about presence, about returning small acts to their rightful owners. The monkey rested a little heavier in Dona Elvira's lap, and in the laundry room's dim light found a human kindred. They moved then toward the rooms that had been changed and rearranged, ready to ask questions and to listen to answers that might be uncomfortable. It was small work. It would be slow, but the house had started to speak again. The wardrobe stood open behind them, a wooden mouth that had held things not meant to be hidden. The shawl lay where it had been folded, and then forgotten. The brushstrokes on the half-finished canvas shimmered like a map that led back to a woman and to the life she still wanted to make. Adriano took a breath. Outside, the day was folding itself into light. He had come home early for reasons he could not entirely name. Now, in the hush that followed discovery, he knew one thing clearly. He would not leave it to someone else to decide what his house and his mother's life should look like anymore. They began to catalog the small losses and the small returns, like people tidying a room after a storm. Each object placed back in its original spot felt like a stitch being made. Each conversation with staff was a step in untangling decisions, and each apology that arrived was a small, necessary ache. But there was still one thing left to resolve. Who had the right and the will to make the house a home rather than a stage? The answer would require more than one discussion. It would require naming what had been taken and why. They moved toward the room where the decisions had been made. The laundry room's light pooled at their feet like a small, honest sun. The monkey blinked up at them, then yawned, a tiny, ridiculous thing that reminded them that life persisted even in closets. Nina looked at Bianca with a steadiness that could have been mistaken for hardness. "You cannot keep choosing who is visible," she said, "not in this house." Bianca's mouth was a thin line. For a moment, the polished veneer she had crafted for so long showed micro-cracks. She had been maintaining a shape of life that favored certain narratives. Now, the story was different. Adriano let the moment bloom into consequence. He had been absent in ways that had allowed this to happen. He would undo it, even if he had to learn new skills to do so. He would ask his mother to paint in the window again. He would bring the lamp back to its rightful place. He would make the house a place that noticed. Outside, the jacaranda tree sighed in the breeze, and petals drifted like small recollections. They were beginning, at last, to gather them up. Bianca's hands found the back of a chair as if steadying herself against a wave. The varnish was warm under her palms. For a long moment, no one spoke. The house exhaled in a way that sounded almost like pity. "You think I wanted it like a stage?" Bianca said finally, the question not aimed at Adriano, but at some shape of herself she could not settle. Her voice had the brittle politeness of someone who had learned to smooth edges by arranging them out of sight. Adriano watched her without answering. He had the strange, new patience of a man who had decided to learn what he had neglected. Nina stood at his side, arms folded, not as judge but as witness. Dona Elvira, drying her hands on the hem of an apron, watched Bianca with a softness that made her seem older than her years. "You moved the photograph," Adriano said, simple and small. "Why?" Bianca's fingers tightened until her knuckles went white. For an instant she became exactly who she had been, a woman who feared the ragged edges of memory. "It was a picture of a man," she answered, "not a comfortable one. It made visitors ask questions I did not want to explain. Do you think I liked pretending nothing had happened? Do you think I enjoyed telling lies? I tried to make things easier." "It wasn't your house to remake," Nina said. There was no anger in her voice now, only the clear statement of a thing returned to its boundary. "You cannot choose who belongs here. That is not yours." Her gaze was steady as stone. Bianca's face shifted, something like shame, like relief, then hardened.
I paid for everything, she said. I kept the accounts. I kept her safe. I nursed her when... The sentence fell away under the weight of memory. You cannot choose who belongs here. That is not yours. Her gaze was steady as stone. Bianca's face shifted, something like shame, like relief, then hardened. I paid for everything, she said. I kept the accounts. I kept her safe. I nursed her when... The sentence fell away under the weight of memory.
For the first time, the people with her in those nights and years stepped into the room. The quietings, the small decisions made in the dark. She had been caretaker and jailer by equal degrees. The two roles blurred. Donna Elvira went to the window then, as if drawn by a light she felt deeper than the room. She set her brush in a jar of turpentine and looked at the half-finished canvas. The paint had dried into a map of intentions, strokes that wanted openness, a corner that still guarded itself. I will finish it, she said, to no one and to everyone. Her voice was not a promise, but a law. The monkey chimed in with a tiny, attention-seeking squeak, and then settled back, fat with the soft consolation of being held. Bianca's eyes filled. You think I wanted to be cruel, she whispered. I thought control was kindness. Adriano stepped forward. He did not reach for her in pity. He reached for the small, practical thing of reconciliation. Bring back what you took, he said. Put the photographs back. Let the lamp stand where it belongs. Let the little things be themselves again. Bianca shook her head. You don't know what I risked. Her voice sank. I thought if no one remembered certain things, then the house could be a place of ease. No accusations, no gossip. I thought I spared her the trouble. You spared her from stories, Nina said, but not from truth. People's lives do not disappear when their pictures are tucked away. They become ghosts in a room. And she... Nina looked to Donna Elvira and then to Adriano, as if measuring how much sorrow the other would carry. She deserves a room that remembers her. Bianca laughed, a small, cracked sound. She doesn't even know, she said. Some of it, she is so far gone. What good does a lamp do if the mind cannot see it? Adriano felt the old anger flare, and then wash, replaced by something steadier. Then we do the thing that is for her, not for how others look. We give her sunlight. We give her choices again, even small ones. If she cannot decide everything, she can decide the brush by the window. She can smell the paint. That is not nothing. There was a long silence, filled with the soft thrumming of the house. A floorboard sighed somewhere upstairs. Outside, a petal stalled on the path and then fell. It was the kind of small, dumb miracle that meant the world still persisted. Bianca pressed her fingers to the photograph left on the dressing table, as if reading it like a page of a book she had once loved. Her mouth formed an apology that was not yet spoken. At last she said, I will put them back. Adriano's relief was not bright, but honest. We will do it together, he said. All of us. No one acts alone in this house anymore. They set to work with the methodical tenderness of people who have offended and wish to atone without theatrics. They had, for years, been part of a choreography that left certain names unspoken. Now they were asked to undo steps, to remember placements, to testify to small truths. Some flinched, some wept. One older woman, who had been here longer than anyone, reached for the shawl and began to tell, in a voice cracked with both pride and regret, the real order of things. Where the lamp had always stood, the nights the easel had been moved, the afternoon when someone had taken a frame away. Donna Elvira leaned the easel toward the window herself. Adriano helped, lifting the aged wood with care. When they set it beneath the glass, sunlight spilled across the canvas like a benediction. The colors woke. For the first time in a long while, paint warmed to light the way flesh warms to a remembered hand. Bianca lingered in the doorway, half a step, as if afraid to be seen. Then she moved and touched a brush head, hesitated, and set it down again. She did not reach for the canvas. That, Adriano knew, would be her step later, if it came at all. For now there was a more important thing, the arrangement of a life's room. They made lists, not formal ones, just the quiet tally of things to return, places to put, people to call when the time was right. They planned in the small human way that replaces grand pronouncements. A stool by the sink, the chair by the window, a lamp with a warm bulb. Nina took charge of a practical order. Adriano promised to be present more. Bianca promised to stop deciding alone. Donna Elvira promised, already, to finish the painting. When the evening glazed the world into gentler hues, Adriano sat on the steps of the back porch and watched Donna Elvira bring a single broad stroke across the canvas. It was as if the house, relieved of the painstaking erasures, breathed again. The monkey, having been reassured, hopped down to his feet and began to explore a fallen petal. Adriano thought of the many small returns they had already made. A photograph slid back into its frame, a lamp replaced, a shawl smoothed. They were stitches, yes, but stitches that made possible a living skin. There remained questions, legalities and resentments, and the rusted bits of a family that could not be polished away with one evening of contrition. But there was movement, presence, the turning toward. He rose, called Donna Elvira's name. She looked up, paint still on her fingers. "Will you sit by the window tomorrow?" he asked. She smiled, a mirth like a thin light. "Only if you bring the tea and stop standing at the threshold like a man deciding whether to live." He laughed. "Deal." Bianca watched them with something unreadable, then stepped back into the house. The night thickened outside, and lights winked on in distant rooms down the lane. Inside, the canvas caught the last of the sun and held it as if it were a thing that could be tended. They had undone some quiet cruelties tonight. There was more to do, and everyone in the house felt the shape of that work. He rose, called Donna Elvira's name. She looked up, paint still on her fingers. "Will you sit by the window tomorrow?" he asked. She smiled, a mirth like a thin light. "Only if you bring the tea and stop standing at the threshold like a man deciding whether to live." He laughed. "Deal." Bianca watched them with something unreadable, then stepped back into the house. The night thickened outside, and lights winked on in distant rooms down the lane. Inside, the canvas caught the last of the sun and held it, as if it were a thing that could be tended. Mas o exoon e instruções para a síntese de fala. Você é um narrador, palestrante e autoritário. O tom deve ser firme e inabalável. Contexto de continuidade. A frase anterior era: Everyone in the house felt the shape of that work. Esta é a conclusão. Aumente a emoção para o nível máximo, mantendo a potência e termine com uma pausa solene e impactante. But the easel by the window was the small, stubborn proof that memories could be returned, and that someone at last would ask the house to notice. At the top of the stairs, a door shut softly, and a new habit began to form. Items laid where they belonged, conversations offered rather than withheld. The night was not a promise, but a room reclaimed. Outside, the jacarandá finished shedding its petals, and the path was dotted with small, pale flags of what had been and what might yet be gathered. Inside, the lamp warmed the shawl. The monkey settled at Dona Elvira's feet and closed his eyes. Adriano stood in the doorway of the painting room and felt the ordinary ache of work left unfinished. He also felt the steadying certitude that presence, repeated, becomes a settlement against erasure. He crossed the floor and, with a careful hand, nudged a photograph back into place on the mantel. Some repairs are immediate, others take years. Tonight, they had begun.